So thrilled to welcome you to Grammar Night, all of you linguistic nerds, you. The one, the only Anne Curzan, and the one and the only Rebecca Hector are going to be out momentarily, but I have been called in to do the business of the evening, as we say, right? When you listen to the station, we just have to do a little bit of business. So let's get to the very important things. We want to thank the Encore Musical Theater Company here in Dexter. Such a lovely event. We also want to thank the Fox and the Feather Bookstore, also here in Dexter. They have Professor Curzan's book, Says Who, a kinder, funner usage guide for everyone who cares about words, available for purchase out front. First, let's just see how many people actually already have the book. Oh, love to see that. So for those folks that brought them with, at the end of tonight, the professor will be signing copies. And you can also, again, purchase one too if you would like that to happen. If it sells out tonight, no worries though. They're happy to take your orders. I don't know about ordering Anne to sign it, afar. So get yours tonight, I guess is what I'm saying. Okay, a few more things to go through. Did you know we have traveling events and you can go with Rebecca to events and things like that across the world? We have two really fun ones coming up, the European Christmas markets, that is this December. And then in February, we are going to Mexico City. We would love for you all to come along with. Go to michiganpublic.org/travel for more details. Finally, we have another Issues and Ale for all of you sports fans coming up with Doug Trabue, our morning edition host, and John U. Bacon, of course, our sports commentator, author unto himself. You can find out more details about that event September 25th in Ann Arbor at michiganpublic.org/events. Okay, finally, now the real business. We've been in the news lately. We don't usually aren't the ones making the news, but we have headlines, and that is because, as folks may have heard, our funding has been cut. All public media funding has been cut for the past 2 years. For Michigan Public, well, here's the good thing, though, folks, is that all of you here in this room and together, it's why I said it was so lovely when I first came out to say, seeing all of your smiling faces, because I really believe this in my heart, that I know we are going to be okay because of all of you. That is how this works. We are here doing this free event this evening because of folks who have given in the past. We will continue to do events just like this with our community, with all of you together when folks give. I will certainly not give the phone number right now, 888-258-9866. You could call, but there's only one person standing by. What I will seriously say, though, I'm hitting you up for your gifts right now. It is as simple as that. This free event, everything that you hear, it's made possible by you. An incredible honor system that has made Michigan Public be able to be in your community and represent you for 76 years. We will be here for another 76 with your help. Here. You can make your gift at michiganpublic.org/donate, or because we are in the 21st century, we have a QR code, guys. It's really cool for public media. We have a QR code, and you can scan it out on the desk after you leave and get your book signed. Okay, that is all the business. Now let's get into nerding out with, as I said, the one and only Anne Curzan and Rebecca Hector. Come on down.
Here because I'm not ashamed, I'm not embarrassed. Yes, I changed my name. My name is now Rebecca Hector. I did not get married. I got unmarried, but congratulations, we're still in order. Woo! Good thing not to rest. I'm Rebecca Hector. Oh. On to the linguistic nerdiness. Do you want to talk about the format? Yeah, that would be great. Okay, so just talking about how we're going to run the evening here. Anne and I are just going to kind of talk a little bit about English, of course. And then we are going to do audience Q&A. We will have a person upstairs with a mic and a person downstairs. I believe we've got Peg downstairs, and we're going to have Frankie upstairs, and they will come to you if you have a question. I know you have questions because you have emailed me your questions, so we are excited. Anne will do her best to answer those. Sometimes we have to turn them into segments because they require more research, so that's great too. Right? But we know that many of you have come with something you're noticing, upset about, have a question about, so we will leave plenty of time for that. And we love that because we get to hear what's on your minds. So I was thinking, on the show, we often are talking about often listener questions, but they're often about things that people are noticing around them right now. So we're talking a lot about current usage, and then I do some history to explain where it came from. And I mean, one thing I noticed yesterday, and we're going to do a little poll of the audience, was I was listening to the radio, and I was listening to Rebecca Hector on the radio. And you were talking about the stock markets yesterday, and you said at least one of them leaped upward.
Yes. I believe it was the Dow. Make the first
And I know you're reading copy. Like when you say that, you're reading copy.
Sometimes, okay, so yes. Oftentimes I will take copy and put it into my natural way of speaking. That one though, I don't know that I would say that in real life. Now that you pointed it out to me, would you have said?
I would not. I would say left.
Left. Yeah.
And so we just want to do a little poll. We can actually see you despite the layout.
Yes.
Which is just to get a sense, leaped versus left. There is no wrong answer here. I would just like to say they are both standard usage. So how many of you would say the Dow Jones leaped up? And how many of you would say left?
Oh, I'm gonna have to call the Associated Press and let them know.
Okay, this is really interesting because the Associated Press would say leaped, and also because this is what it's like to live in Anne's brain. After I heard Rebecca do this and I got access to a computer, I went to the Google Books Ngram viewer to see what was going on with the frequency of leaped versus left. And in American English, in writing, leaped is still more common than leapt. Which is very interesting. If you look at both British and American English together, they're kind of neck and neck with each other. But clearly this room is all about leapt. So we often talk about things like that. I am actually trained as a historian of the English language. And we do talk about on the show, I will say things like, this goes all the way back to Old English, as if everyone knows when that is, and we all agree on Old English. And then I will talk about Middle English, sure, things like that. So because I have you all here in the audience, I thought, well, I could do one of my favorite party tricks, which is to recite a little bit of Old English. So Old English, people debate about what the dates, but it's sort of from the beginning of English, whatever you want to call that. Some people will say before 49, as to when the Germanic tribes started coming over to England and bringing their Germanic dialect with them until 66, 1100, something like that is the Old English period. And so Beowulf, Old English, and my party trick is the first few lines of Beowulf. So here we go. What? We gardena in Yero Dark Theo de Kuningas through Yeftunas, with our athelingus Adam Fleminen. Off-shield shaving shaft and a thaya to Monica make the mirror set the off tear. So that's empty. I had to study that, obviously, to be able to understand it. If you see it in writing, a little bit more will look familiar. The second word is way, spelled W-E. We still have that word. Pronounced differently, but it's we. Gar Dana, Gar meant spear, Dana meant Danes, the spear Danes, the people. In those first lines is the word kuning. A kuning, we still have kunings, they're kings. And in Old English, you would actually say kuning. The g was actually pronounced in a word like kuning. And then there are words in there that died. So one of the words in there is Ellen, which meant bravery. And it just died. So that's Old English. And so when we say a word is going all the way back to Old English, usually it's a Germanic word. It's been in English the whole time. And then Middle English, 1066 to 1476, 1500, somewhere in there. And this is Chaucer. And I would guess there are a few people, I see them nodding, who could still do the first 18 lines of the Canterbury Tales. Right? We got some people who are like, I can do it. I'm ready. Call on me. I'm not going to call on anyone to do the first lines of the Canterbury Tales. I also had to learn those in college. But let me share something interesting about those that nobody told me when I had to memorize the first 18 lines of the Canterbury Tales. Did you have to do this? Juan that April with his shoulders sword, and the rucht of March hath pierced it to the rote. So those are the first two lines. What nobody, I was just like, okay, well, those vowels are weird. Because you can see it's the drought, drucht, drought, rote, R-O-O-T-E, root. And what you have to do to recite, part of what you have to do to recite Chaucer is undo the great vowel shift. So there was this change in English vowels. English vowels are still changing all the time. But in the Renaissance, late Middle English Renaissance, there was this dramatic change in vowels where, for example, the sound O became oo. So root, spelled R-O-O-T, that double O was actually an O, and it was rote. But right as this huge vowel shift is happening, spelling is getting standardized. So the spelling reflects often reflects this pre-vowel shift pronunciation. So you get rote, which actually would have had an O. House, the oo becomes an ow. So drucht, drought, hoes, house, moose, mouse, right? So those were, it was actually a little moose and many geese. Right? I mean, so that's what I get to study in the history of English, and that's when we're referring to Old English, Middle English. That's kind of what we're up to.
That is what we are talking about. I'm just behind the scenes talking about it.
So Rebecca, then I wanted to ask you a question because for at least a little bit on the show, I wasn't sure who actually was writing up the blurb on the Michigan Public website.
Yeah.
So for those of you who actually go to the website, we do the show and then it pops up on the website and there is a description of the show with always a really clever title. That is Rebecca, does that. And how do you come up with the titles? How do you come up with the cover?
Oh my goodness. I make some very, I'm waiting for the day that somebody gets one of my very, very subtle references to 80s alternative music or...
So do people notice that the music at the end is usually related to what we've just talked about?
Well, it used to be.
Oh, you're not doing it.
No, I have been pulling things from the NPR audio library, but no, I used to love it when we would talk about I think we talked about Thunder once, so I got to use Thunderstruck by AC/DC. But there was some copyright stuff, so I've just been sticking with the NPR audio library as of late. But I had a lot of fun doing that.
And how do you decide how to do the blurb?
Yeah, just
on the website. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Writing for radio is different. I came into radio from sort of an academic world, and we use far fewer words when we are writing it for radio. But in this case, I've got something that started off as a piece that was written for radio that I then have to sort of translate back into something that would be written. And it actually, for as short as that little blurb is, it takes me a really long time to do that. Because I want to make sure that I'm, keeping making sure that I'm, keeping what you are saying, in context, but we don't write the way that we speak. We don't tend to speak the way that we write. So I feel like I'm a translator actually, but it can be sort of a lengthy process.
And you all are probably guessing. We do it unscripted. So the show,
and usually in one take. Usually.
Well, but I know So Rebecca will know what we're going to talk about, and I'll give her just the briefest sort of, here are the big bullet points we're going to talk about, but then so that it can be spontaneous doing it, and then she has to write it up later.
Yes. And you talk about some complicated things that I'm always afraid that I'm going to get a fact wrong, though. But so far, I mean, I think we've done pretty good getting from the radio to the website.
Yes, and there are. So someone right before the show asked us about how many questions do you get every week? Because you probably noticed that now, much of the time, we're like, this is coming from a listener. Somebody asked, blah, 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 and we're answering the question. And we get two to three, four every week, which you can quickly do the math. We have fallen way behind. So occasionally we'll do a lightning round to try to pick up a few of them, but we're way behind. Sometimes people write in with something we've done before, and I'll try to get up to the archive. Sometimes I will look into your question, and it just isn't actually that interesting. So I can't come up with something that I feel like people would actually want to hear about. Sometimes your question is complicated enough that I think, 5 minutes? How am I going to answer that question in 5 minutes?
I'd like to point out, too, that this started off as a 4-minute segment.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Oh, the 3 minutes.
When Rena and I started, it was just over 3 minutes.
We're closing in on 5.5 minutes now, I'd say.
We're pushing it.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm ready for another audience poll question on a thing. I was actually over at the station and this week, and someone at the station said, the LaCroix came up, the drink. And they said, I can use that as a generic for all bubbly water products. Is there anyone else here who can use LaCroix as a generic?
Do we I think we had one taker.
We have one.
There we go. Not me.
Yeah, so I had never heard this. Now we can all watch for it. Really, the question is, are people calling something a LaCroix, which is, of course, the trademarked name for something that is a different brand? And this obviously happens. Q-tip, Kleenex, Xerox, Thermos, Frisbee, Escalator, Zipper, Band-Aid. Because what do you call a Band-Aid? I know, an adhesive strip, which and it's a cotton swab, but nobody calls it that. So, but one of my favorite stories about this was when this is years ago now, I was hanging out with a linguist friend of mine, and we had just cooked something, and I said, can you hand me the Reynolds wrap? And she handed it to me, and she said, is that a generic term for you? And I said, isn't it a generic term for everyone? And she said, no. Are there other people here who can use Reynolds wrap for all tinfoil? Okay, I have some friends. I see a few. Okay, in the same, I would guess more of you can use saran wrap for the plastic wrap. Okay, it is not a far jump to get from saran wrap to Reynolds wrap. Okay, but here's the best part of the story. So of course, my friend alerts me to this. Now I've become obsessed with it. I write a blog post about it for the Chronicle of Higher Ed. A few weeks later, a very large box arrives at my office in Angel Hall at the University of Michigan. And I open it, and there's a letter from Reynolds. And they say, hi, we caught your blog post in the Chronicle of Higher Education, and we wanted to make sure that you had some of this shiny stuff. And I mean, it's like a lifetime supply of Reynolds wrap. The big stuff, the heavy duty, small, like every size.
You said you used it up, though.
I know. I use a lot of Reynolds wrap. Because there are all kinds of uses for it. But I then thought, what else can I blog about? I should blog about iPhone. Possibilities. But genericide is what that's sometimes genericization or genericide. And another thing that's interesting about that is that people will sometimes say, well, companies must want that. And I see that they don't. And they try to police it really carefully because sometimes it will, but then their name is everywhere. But it also means that people aren't paying attention to what brand they're buying. So they're just sort of like, well, if it's all Kleenex, who cares? I'll just buy whatever. So if you actually look, I think Q-Tip still does this. There's on their ads, there's a footnote. And Xerox was doing this for a while. Like, this is a trademark term. This is not a generic because they have to police it or else they'll lose the trademark on it. So things like Google, right? Which now as a verb has become generic. So these are things that we, and then the other thing that is on my mind, and I see we've had, is of course young people's slang, which we get to talk about sometimes on the radio. And I was with some folks last night who said, well, you know, I try to be hip, and we said the fact that you used the word hip probably just ready to take you out of the running for this. But I haven't been teaching this past year, which has meant that I haven't spent as much time with undergrads, which has made me very not as hooked into their slang, which is hard for me because I do love learning their slang. And it is funny, I mean, it's now years ago when I hit the age where the students would say the slang, I would then say the slang back to them and they would laugh uproariously. Because I'm too old to say the word, and I'm the teacher, and the whole thing, they're just like this. And then I would have follow-up questions. Can it take an object? Can it take an indirect object? Like, it's slang. It's still a verb. So we have to figure this out. But I think one of my highlights from the past year was the Word of the Year vote. Which, so now I vote with the American Dialect Society, but Merriam-Webster does one, and Oxford does one. And brain rot was the word of the year from one of them, I think maybe Oxford. And there was a lot of talk about skibbity. Which, if you want to know what skibbity means, I cannot answer that for you because skibbity means everything. It's a very confusing, fast-moving term. But I will tell you that skibbity Ohio is bad. But here and now interview me about words of the year. And I was like, there are two things that I want to make sure that I say in this segment, which was 3 minutes. It was Scott Tong. And I thought, okay, one, they're going to want to talk about Riz. And it was interesting, when you look at people's descriptions of Riz, which if you don't know what Riz is, it's short for charisma. And it's been around for now a few years. I mean, it's not getting old. And it can be a noun, so you can have Riz, which is good, and you can Riz someone up, which is flirting with them. So rizzing someone up, having Riz. And people were often referring to it as internet slang. And I was like, it's not. It has been spread through the internet, but it actually comes from African American slang. And I wanted to clarify that on the radio because it's really important that people know where things come from, and particularly when they've been appropriated from a community into mainstream use, it's good for people to know. So I was like, okay, that's one thing. And the other thing is, on National Public Radio, I want to say skippity toilet. And I did. Because that's where skippity comes from. So if you need something to do later tonight, search skippity toilet. Don't. Please don't. It's a very weird set of images and cartoons. You've seen this, yes?
I'll admit, yes, I'm just kidding.
And it's where skippity comes from. And I did feel that I should see what Scott Tong would do if I said skippity toilet on the air.
What did he do?
Moved on. So we take a couple of...
Yeah, I think we could get to some questions. Let's see.
Oh, I saw.
Put your hand up. We will have somebody with a mic on to you. All right.
Pet peeve.
We're ready.
Okay, pet peeve. It's not tinfoil.
Correct me. All right, we got one peeve out there in being corrected. So one of the funny things about, of course, correcting me is the next thing you know, you'll be on the radio. I actually remember, Zoe, I think this was with you. Somehow we got into this conversation about the pronunciation of lackadaisical, which I say lackadaisical, which is not standard. And then, of course, when and so it wasn't you who corrected me, but somebody corrected my pronunciation, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to talk about that on the radio.
The dropping of the N in history.
Okay. All right, so the question was, you have the word historian. Is it a historian or an historian? Okay, I think we should do a poll.
You want to do a poll?
Yes, but first, what about, do you, a historian or an historian?
I think it has been drilled into me to do a historian.
But who drilled that into you? Okay. All right, so those are your two choices. How many of you have a historian?
See, they're with me.
An historian.
Oh, well.
Wow.
Somebody raised their hand twice.
Well, they might have both. You might, because if you have both, there's some chance you might have a less formal and a more formal. And I think that my guess is that an historian is more formal. And an historian is actually a little bit hard to say if you are an American English speaker who pronounces the H. Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up for that. Thank you. So if you're an American, the word historian has an H at the beginning. And there are many British dialects that are H dropping. So you get historian, history, no H. And if you start historian with a vowel, then you would say N. But if you're an American English speaker, you start historian, odds are historian. Ha, ha, ha. And before consonants, we use a. So it is, you'll see it more often in writing than you'll hear it in speech, unless people are being really careful. There is no good reason in American English to say an historian, because we still have the H. Now, it is true, I'm just going to random fact here. My colleague John McWhorter, who some of you probably know who writes also for the New York Times, has in one of his podcasts talked about the fact that the consonant "h" in English is in trouble. Right? I mean, it is falling out of use in English. It's very restricted in where it shows up. It shows up at the beginning of words, forward at the beginning of a stressed syllable. So think about vehicle, right? That H is not pronounced because the stress is not on that syllable. It's vehicle. The stress is on the first syllable, so the H is not pronounced. As compared to vehicular, now the H suddenly is like, hello, I'm still here. But it only gets to be there when the stress is on its syllable. So you get vehicular, but vehicle. That is not a healthy consonant. Right? I mean, so I'm a big fan of a historian, if you're an American English speaker and read.
That's, if I saw an historian in audio copy, I would change it. Because I would have a hard time.
You're not going to see it on my copy.
Keep an eye out for it.
All right, what else do you have?
We want to take one from upstairs?
Hi. I'd like to terrorize my non-native English-speaking friends by telling them there are at least 12 ways to pronounce O-U-G-H. Can you say anything about how they're talent?
Yeah, so your poor friends. We asked you. That OUGH is one of the well-known, so you have, I'm not going to get them all, words like though, cough, thought, enough, bow, rough. This one I'm not going to be able to do easily off the top of my head because each one of those has got a different historical story to it. We might bank that one and I will see if I can fit it into 5 minutes. I probably can, so stay tuned on the radio. But part of what you're seeing there is different histories of those words. That GH was actually pronounced in a word like thought. We're going to get to go back to the Great Vowel Shift. The word thought, you thought you were done with it, but it's coming back, was in Old English, thucht. And the oo became an ow, but that GH was actually pronounced in the same way that night with a K was knicht, which makes much more sense as to why it would actually be spelled that way. So the K was pronounced, the I was actually an E sound, knicht, and that GH was a H, knicht. So that GH has become silent in most words. You can occasionally get it as an F in something like enough. So we'll try to do that on the radio because it is complicated enough on the history of those words that I want to make sure I have my facts right.
Yes, use of the pronoun that rather than who when talking about people. So people that listen in.
Yeah.
In public.
All right, the people that listen to Mr. in Public. Is this something that comes up for you in copy or the people that versus the people who?
I cannot tell you the last time it came up, but I'm sure it has at some point.
Okay. I love that you brought this up because as I study the history of English, I'm very open-minded. It probably frustrates some of you when you're like, Anne, it's just wrong. Stop explaining it. It's just wrong. We recently re-aired the episode about ancestors, right, versus descendants.
Well, emails about
We
that
got some
one.
really angry emails about that. Like, ancestors cannot mean descendants. And I'm like, I hear you, and if you listen to people, sometimes it does. So I'm very open-minded in general, and I have my peeves. And for a long time, one of my peeves was people that. I was like, people should get who, that is for inanimate objects. And so I would actually, in student writing, underline a that, and I'd write who above it, being all persnickety about it. Until one of my graduate students came up and said, why do you keep underlining this? And I said, because it is an antecedent and you should use who. And he said, every grammar textbook says you can use either. And so, and of course, it was totally right. And as a historian of the English, I should know better because that has been used with animate antecedents for hundreds of years. You can do, if you look at old versions of the Lord's Prayer, you get our Father that art in heaven. Like that is one of the Old English versions. And I thought, and you know better. So I have had to stop underlining it because I was not right. So that's a place where you can have your own preference of saying, I prefer to use who for intimate and intimate, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with using that for intimate antecedents. I stood corrected.
You also said a historian, and I noticed it just. You called yourself a historian.
A historian. Yeah, I was like, I could not. I don't think I can. It's really hard for me to say an historian.
Is there an explanation you give for the use of the dog is, like the problem is that?
Okay, so the question was, I think it was, do I have any thoughts about, or can I explain? The double is, as in, the thing is that. The question is, the problem is, If you think you don't do this, you just might. I had a colleague, this was in the early 2000s. I was on the bargaining team for the University of Michigan on one of the contracts. And there was someone on that team who used the double is all the time. All the time. The problem is, the question is, the thing is. And so, of course, I had to alert someone else on the team to this. And then I will admit that at various points when we were in closed session, just our team, we'd have our laptops up, we would be keeping count of the double is. So then I had to go try to figure out what is going on with the double is. What people want to say is, oh, it's a mistake. But it's so common that I don't want to just say it's a mistake. Because for the people who say it, and it's not a disfluency. People say, oh, it must be a disfluency there. So, but the problem is that when you hear people do it, it is not disfluent. What they say is, the thing is that it's not at all disfluent. It's on National Public Radio. So I went into these databases of spoken English and I could find it. And it is almost always with these little introductory things. The X is. The question is, the problem is, the thing is. My theory, there are a few linguists who've written about this, so I may be wrong, but my theory is that what we have here, I just had to make sure I didn't do a double S. My theory is that that phrase, the X is, has become what linguists would call lexicalized. It's become a unit. It's like an introductory it, as in it's raining. And the thing is now a unit. But I did that referring to the thing is as a unit. The thing is, as a phrase, is a unit. So you introduce that unit. The thing is, now you need a verb. Is. Because what that phrase is doing, is a focuser phrase. All it's doing is saying, pay attention. I'm about to say something important. I'm about to say the thing, or the issue, or the question. So it's a focuser. The thing is blah. Listen for it. You will now hear it all around you. My partner was like, I don't say that. And then, of course, 10 minutes later, there was. So and it's been around for a few decades, I think, and I think that's what's going on there.
What else have we got? We got somebody upstairs?
Okay, I'm actually a middle school English teacher, and I used to have slang. Once I say it, it's actually not only do they laugh, but they stop saying it. So I was wondering how the two of you progress with your show without getting semantic saturation. Because even when you're asking holiness, I've got the thinking about it so much, the words and it happens, when we're talking in class about morphology or something, and the kids are suggesting words that have suffixes in, and I'm like, no, I don't think that's word, but I'm not sure so how do you guys prevent that? The two of you. The word doesn't happen.
I don't know.
Yeah, so if I understand your question correctly, which I love, and I completely agree with you that once older people start saying a slang word, it's the best way to kill it. It's done. Was how can we recreate our own natural speech or figure out what we actually say because once you start thinking about any word enough, it gets weird. Just like,
Some do this to me all the time.
I do. So you'll notice on the radio that I'll often ask Rebecca, do you use that word? Can you have that meaning?
Long pause. I know, I have to think really hard about it, and then I can't remember if I do or not. And then sometimes you'll put it in context though, and I'll say, oh, that's right, I could do it.
Right, because sometimes you'll say, well, I don't do that. And then I'll say, well, what about in this phrase? And then you'll say, oh, well, I could do it if it's in that phrase. I mean, the best way that I, for the most part, I can't rely on my own intuitions about it because, first of all, I'm only one speaker. And second of all, once I think about it too much, if I can't figure out what I actually do. So this is where now online, there are all of these free databases of both written and spoken language. And a lot of that language is getting more and more informal. So you can find real usage as opposed to scripted usage, which means that when I'm prepping for something, I can go on and go into these databases and see what people are actually doing. Now, Rebecca doesn't get that prep. So then I just come in all prepped and say, Rebecca, can you do this? And then she has to go through that process of trying to figure out if she does it. And sometimes I help, sometimes I don't. But
yeah, I will admit there's been times when I didn't think I did something and we would settle on that, and then like 2 days later I'd be talking about something at home, and yeah.
And then you hear it.
Yeah, and then I hear it.
Okay, so I'm going to tell another story because this brought this to mind, and I don't know if we've ever told this on the radio. And it's about a word, and I would guess many of you have these, a kind of family word, but I didn't know it was a family. And at one point, many years ago, I was talking to my undergraduate students in a class, and something had gone wrong with the servers at U of M in email. And so I said, if I haven't responded to your email, I'm really sorry. My email box has been clogged. And the student said, that's not a word. It's clogged. And I said, of course it's a word. And they said, it's not a word. And of course, this is what we've been talking about in class. And they said, no, it's really not in the dictionary. And so class ends, I go back to my office, I look in all the standard dictionaries in my office, and it is nowhere. At which point I'm quite distraught. Because I grew up with this word, P-L-O-G, plog. So I call my sister. And my brother-in-law answers the phone. And I say, is Kate there? And he says, no. And he said, can I help you? And I said, I need to talk to Kate because my students told me that plot is not a word, and I'm sure that we grew up with this. And he said, well, it's not a word, but Kate says it. So then I call back later, and it turned out my mother was visiting my sister, and I say, Kate, don't you use the word plug? And she says, yes. And I said, well, you asked Mom if she used the word plug. And Kate, I hear her, and she's like, Mom, don't you use the word plug? And my mom says, I don't ever use the word plug. And Kate gets back on the phone, and she says, yeah, like, your nose can be plugged, the toilet can be plugged. And I hear behind, my mother says, well, of course the toilet can be plugged. It's a great word. Plug plus clog equals really a problem.
No, I don't have any words like that.
So yes, and we did do I did a little research with the folks at the Dictionary of American Regional English, and they have found a few other plugged speakers in various parts of the United States, but we are few and far between.
Well, we're
That's right. I hope you all will take this word and run with it.
Anna's making plug happen.
It's a great word.
So we were talking about transit words. My prediction is that the words that older people are using are now going to be transit. The principals in our school using the word shenanigans. And all the students are using.
I'm also principal.
Using the principal. 50, maybe?
Yeah.
What kind of information?
I happen to have a friend who uses this word quite a bit. Who is
Shenanigans.
yeah.
It's a great word.
I don't know when it started happening, but it seems like you can't just look at a pair of shoes and say, we shoes. people need to see the ending with ones, and it drives me crazy.
Like these ones?
These ones. Yeah, it's all it's not necessary. Why people ask why?
We did this one. This one.
We did this one.
Relatively recently, and actually, I think this was one where I asked you, and then when we kept talking about it in context, it made more sense. You're absolutely right that people are doing this. It is also not ungrammatical. And you hear it, I know, because people, I don't like it. When it's singular, we have no problem with it. So this red one versus that blue one. I like this red one or that blue one. And so if the singular is fine, that immediately raises the question of, if you do the singular, why can't you do it in the plural? These red ones. And if you put a modifier in there, people feel less cranky. So these red ones versus those blue ones, as opposed to these ones and those ones. But that's a questionable peeve, I think. We'd be like, all you have to do is insert an adjective. And I'm, well, that's fine, but just keep the adjective. Because if you take away the adjective, I don't like it anymore. I mean, I get it. And I say that as a joke to not, one of the things when I was writing the book that, and I'd been doing this for a while, but became more and more important to me, was to naturalize and recognize that we all have peeves, that we hear things and we say, I don't like that. I wish the language would not do that, or speakers wouldn't do that. And because when I started the book, I thought that I was writing, I made this distinction between wordies, people who love words, and grammandos, people who correct other people's language. And, yes, and grammandos, a term from Lizzie Skernick, it was in the New York Times that should be a word. It's such a good word, right? So, and you can go grammando on someone, which is just, it's totally spot on. And so I thought, when I started writing the book, I thought, oh, I'm writing two grammandos and trying to help them be wordies. And then what I realized was, no, actually, I think every person in their head has a little wordy and a little grammando. Now, my wordie has a really big microphone. And my wordie's like, that's cool, and that's cool, and that's cool. But every once in a while, my grammando looks at him and is like, well, I don't like that. So the people that, or as I've been very public about, impactful. I'm getting over it, but I didn't like the word impactful. I don't like double click to me move to the next slide. Right? We're going to double click on that, which is like we're going to dive deeper on that thing. And people often say, oh, there are these 3 reasons, let's double click on the first one, and then they go to the next slide. But that's just my little grammando getting upset about something, which is completely natural. And so what I realized was I was trying to help us have more conversations with our inner grammando so that we can say, is that a good peeve? And what do I want to do with that peeve? Maybe just keep it in my head, as opposed to enforcing it onto other people. And I think that that's a good conversation to have. And as a teacher, when I think about it, is this one that my students should know as they navigate the world, to know that some people may be cranky about this? Or is this just an and thing that they don't actually need to worry about? No. Here we go.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Is this not my question?
Yes, we have a question from one of our online viewers on the topic of pet peeves. Rita asks, or mentions, I suppose, that it drives her crazy when bring is used instead of take, and when less is used instead of fewer. Do we have any insight into why that might be?
It was bring and take, and less and fewer. Okay, the bring and take, for the people who feel strongly about this, people in here who feel strongly about bring and take. And we've got like 4. So you can go hang out afterward together. And some of you are like, I don't even know what you're talking about right now. The concern is
and I believe is that you bring things toward and you take things away. That there's a directionality to bringing and taking. So I should not say, I'm bringing this to the potluck because I'm going toward the potluck. This distinction actually doesn't hold up in terms of usage. We bring things both directions and take it. So it's a distinction that doesn't hold up very well when you look at actual usage. Less versus fewer.
It's like a lot.
Well, it comes up a lot. Wow, we got groaning. That is how you know you're in a house with word nerds. Is that you say less, fewer, they go, oh. My mother felt very strongly about this. The distinction that grammar books try to enforce is that less is for uncountable nouns, like water, and fewer is for countable nouns, like books. So you have less water and fewer books. And if we imagine that you're advertising a disinfectant that reduces germs, you would have fewer germs because you can count germs. You have to look up.
Yes.
But at least in theory, you can count the germs. But if you look at advertising, you will get 90% less germs. And so that's the distinction that grammar books try to make. It is a distinction that is getting lost in the language. Some of you see it in grocery stores with 10 items or less, 15 items or less. My mother, when she took us to the grocery store as children, would point out the sign and say to her girls, that sign is wrong, it should be 10 items or fewer. And people wonder why I do what I do. It's less is taking over the territory of fewer. We will be fine. I mean, that's like the fundamental thing here is that it is never going to be confusing. Right? There's nothing confusing about that if it says 10 items or less or 10 items or fewer, or there were less people there or fewer people there. We know that if we compare, the number is smaller than the other number because there were less or fewer. And there are places where it's already completely colloquial. As someone who works in a school setting, you would say, write an essay of 800 words or less. And it's clear that words are countable, but you would say less. And if you're thinking about a unit, something like 2 weeks, as kind of a unit, you would say it'll happen in less than 2 weeks, as opposed to fewer than 2 weeks. Or I ran less than 20 miles because it's, so you can see ways that probably even for those of you who like the distinction, you think, well, that one doesn't sound so bad to me, where less is encroaching over there, but can we keep it away from over here? It'll take a long time for it to die. So, but you're watching, my guess is you're watching the decline of fewer.
Yeah, that's something we do talk about ambiguity a lot with peeves, and whether is it ambiguity? Is this thing serving a purpose? But more often than not, you can't understand what people are saying.
Well, and this reminds me, we actually had someone email us with a question ahead of time.
Oh, that's right. I believe Nan. I didn't miss her name.
What was it?
Nancy.
It could have been, but
It started with an
how organized is this? This is someone who said, I have a question for grammar night, and I'm going to email you about it now, which is also helpful because we could prep.
That was a while ago.
Do you want to?
I can't remember exactly how she asked, but it had to do with the word sub and subbing in something. And I believe the example she gave had to do with if you're ordering at a fast food counter and you want to sub coleslaw for French fries. The question is, well, we could do a poll right now. If I say I want to sub coleslaw for French fries, what am I getting? Raise your hand if I'm getting coleslaw. I want to sub coleslaw for French fries. Okay. Raise your hand if I'm getting French fries. There's a couple.
We've had a few. Okay. And I was thinking about that example because you were just talking about the ambiguity. So there is a big ambiguity where you say, I would like to sub coleslaw for French fries, and some of you are getting coleslaw, and some of you are getting French fries.
For what it's worth, I wanted coleslaw, so.
And this is, it is a funny ambiguity with sub, which, I mean, prepositions are tricky in English. So I was thinking about this example. If I said, I'm going to use a different one. Just.
What was the one you used to have?
I was thinking about a recipe that I was doing where you could either have mayonnaise or yogurt. I'm going to substitute mayonnaise for yogurt. So that would mean to me I'm going to use the mayonnaise. But if I said I'm going to substitute mayonnaise with yogurt, now we got the yogurt. Yeah, right. So you switch the preposition, and now we're doing something different. But there are speakers where that for is what I would use to do with what I would do with. So, and if your for can do the work of with, now we're doing different things when we're subbing X for Y. Some people are getting X, and some people are getting Y. Now, luckily, often in context, it's clear because it's on the menu and it comes with fries, and you say, I want to sub coleslaw for the fries, and it's clear the fries were what was on the menu. So context often helps you out there. But it is a long-standing, from what I can tell, ambiguity with substitute that does not seem to serve us particularly well, I would say.
I've got them over here.
I was making my own from then oriented and oriented. Because he says oriented.
Okay. Orient versus orientate.
Did we talk about this one? Did we talk about this one? Putting a head nod over here.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts on this? Do you use orientate?
I don't think that's just too bad. Okay, so we're talking, you said
Orient versus orientate.
I need to get oriented. Like, maybe, I don't know.
She's having a moment. She's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I might
I
not.
don't think I say orientate. I also just don't think I use that word very often, is the problem. But I say that every time.
I mean, what I think has happened with this one is you had orient, and then the noun was orientation. And then you get a back formation from the noun where you only take off the ION as opposed to the ATION. And so orientation, what do you do at orientation? You orientate. Okay. But I'm going to defend this because I actually think with this one, there is a useful distinction as someone who works on a university campus. Because for me, orient has a very strong connotation of direction. Like I'm orienting myself east-west, like where am I? And I'm orienting myself directionally. Whereas at many orientations, you're actually getting lots of information about, for example, the university. Where can you get this and where do you register and where can you blah, blah, blah. You're getting lots of information. So you're being orientated. You're not being oriented to the university, you're being orientated to the university. And I think that is a potentially useful distinction. And so, yes, it is happening. Most people in this room clearly are not happy about it. And don't like I get a sense they're not persuaded by why it's
We're not running over.
But I can imagine that one actually succeeding because it potentially does have a useful meaning. For those of you who cannot think, we just got no. It is not a useful meaning. We will have none of that. Okay, I could hear it. The depth of the adverb, drive safe versus drive safely. You have friends. So both of you in this. Yes. Can you do both? Do you? Yes. Okay, let's imagine you have a little dinner party. People are leaving your house.
Yes.
You have a dinner. Let's imagine you have a dinner party.
Yes. Yep.
People are leaving your house.
Leave the house. Yep. Drive safe.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Because I sound like a public service announcement. If I say, drive safe, person you.
But I might tell somebody that I arrived safely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So safely, I would say, okay, I don't think safely is not dead and the adverb is not dying. There are something that linguists would call flat adverbs. And a flat adverb is, because many adverbs take ly, which is so safe, safely. But flat adverbs look exactly the same as an adjective and an adverb, so nothing gets added to them. And we have many of those that are standard. So you think about fast. I am fast, adjective. I drive fast, adverb. So that's a flat adverb, happily. Slow has actually long been able to be both a flat adverb and an ly adverb. And you can go back to Shakespeare and find slow as an adverb. So drive slow, drive slowly. We're at a point where people say drive slow is wrong, but that flat adverb actually has been around for a long time. Now, safe has not been a flat adverb for a long time, but I think what you're hearing from Rebecca and me is that it feels to me more colloquial, less formal to say drive safe. If I was writing formally, I would use safely. And that's where, I guess, as a linguist and someone who does this show and as a teacher of writing, I'm trying to make more of those kinds of distinctions where we don't jump, that is right and that is wrong, as opposed to that we use in more formal usage, that feels more informal. Because flat adverbs aren't wrong, and if an adverb wants to start to become flat, we could let it lose its ly. And one of the flat adverbs that is probably the most stigmatized is good as an adverb. Right? So she cooks good. And that people feel like that one, we're good. It's a very non-standard to use it as an adverb. It's been used that way for a long time, but it's a stigmatized flat adverb.
Let's have more upstairs. That's a question.
Thank you all for prepared with such good questions. It's really fun.
Okay, so you know how there's so many of us that just cringe when we hear misuse of a subject verb of reading. I'm sure a lot of people do, right? So I was talking to my son about it, who was college educated, and he said, Mom, does it really matter if you understood what they were trying to communicate to you? And I said, absolutely. And he goes, well, why? Would you never go to the answer for them?
It's a really important question. And one that I feel like in some ways we're addressing every week a little bit. We live in a world that has a standardized form of American English that at the moment it has a lot of gatekeeping functions, right? Where to get particular kinds of jobs, to get into particular kinds of schools, you want to, particularly in writing, be able to control that variety of English. That variety of English is not actually better than other varieties of English, it's just the standardized variety. And so as a teacher, I feel like I want to make sure my students have access to that. So that they can have access to things where that is the gate. And then they can decide what they want to do with that, and they can push on it. And they can say, well, why do I have to do that? And I will say, well, there isn't a good reason, but some people will judge you about that. Because students will become the next gatekeepers. And I want them to open the gates wide. So when I say there isn't a good reason for that, I want you to know that some people feel really strongly about it. But when you're vetting job applications, you could not feel so strongly about that. Because often what we're judging, language cannot be a free-for-all. Let's just start with that. I mean, when people say, well, there is an agreement, there is agreement. Because if language were free-for-all, we actually would not understand each other. Because I would be using a word in a way that was totally different from someone else. If I start using skunk to mean table, that's not going to work well for me. And if I start rearranging the whole syntax of my sentence in a way that does not follow patterns of English grammar, I'm not going to be able to communicate. So often when we are talking about, when people are saying this doesn't agree or it doesn't have grammar, it actually is just a different system. That it's a difference between you are versus you is, right? Okay, that's not a free-for-all. That is just can you use a singular verb with is? And there actually are arguments to be made that because you can now be both plural and singular, it's kind of helpful if you can use you are versus you is because it gets rid of the ambiguity. But it's not standard. It could become standard if we let it. We are the gatekeepers, all of us, and our students will become the gatekeepers. So I think, so part of it is, it's not a free-for-all. Second, there is a value to knowing what is considered standard and what is considered not standard, so that in different contexts, you can use that if you want to, and also so you can push on it and change it if you want to. So that would be the way I come. So if I have time for a couple more questions. Yeah.
Okay, I should get something of a follow-up to your gatekeeper.
Yeah.
Which is artificial intelligence, large language models, etc. I'm going to talk about things tonight. We have like English speakers being with but other study that, and there's a big influence. Yeah. And I'm just curious, how do you English being interactive?
Yeah. It's amazing we got this far before we talked about AI. So kudos to us for getting this far. It's a terrific question. I think the first thing I'll say is I think as with pretty much everything in the world of artificial intelligence, we have no idea. Right? I mean, this technology is moving so fast. And we don't know what the effects of this are going to be on our lives, on our jobs, on the language, on teaching, on education. I think about a lot in that space. I think with AI, one thing is to separate the written from the spoken. A colleague of mine right now is looking at AI writing and the way it patterns. And the patterns that it uses, you can actually, it's different from most human writing because it's going to the mean. That's what AI does. But it's getting better and better, or at least it was. Something interesting is happening now because large language models are now feeding their own text into them. Which is, so I don't think we're quite clear on what's going to happen. For a long, it was using human-generated text, and now it is using AI-generated text in addition to human text to figure out what human text looks like, but it's not all human. So there's the written variety, which is still you can see some of the ways it patterns, and it looks like right now at least it's different. I've been listening to some of these Notebook LM podcasts, things, I don't know if any, where it can take text and turn it into a podcast. You've heard this? And it's getting better and better, but it still doesn't sound fully human because it doesn't hesitate very well the way humans hesitate. It's not just fluent. But also, I was listening to one yesterday that someone sent me, and one of these AI generated just kept, one of them would say something and it would just go, wow. And then it didn't say anything else. It was just like, wow. And it did it 3 times with nothing else. And I thought, 2 humans in conversation, if I could just go, wow. But again, by next week, it probably will be better at doing wow in a way that sounds more believable. We're in there with everybody else trying to figure it out. It's in the same way that the internet allowed language to travel around the globe in seconds in ways that we're still trying to understand the effects of that. Now AI is generating language and we have to figure out what that means for the history of English. But human speakers will continue to be creative with the language. As speakers to each other, we will continue to generate change in language because speech is a human to human phenomenon and part of the relationship. How do you want to close this out here, Rebecca? She always looked at one of the things that is amazing. I know. So she catches me every time that we do the show. I'm just trying to keep the facts straight. And her brain is able, by the end, now you'll listen, she almost always has some really clever pun right at the end. And then I just look at her like, because I can't be that clever right at the end. And so you hear me, I'm like, see you next week. Thanks.
That's my little combination is the pun.
So now you know to listen for that. You'll hear her say something clever, and then just imagine me with my mouth hanging open, like I don't know what to say right now, and then I just say, see you next week. Now I'm just gonna go, wow.
I was frantically trying to think of something clever, just saying, this is what I do. Sometimes, like in the last couple of seconds that you are talking, I am mostly listening to, but I'm also thinking, trying to think of something clever to say. I don't have anything clever, but I would really like to thank all of you for coming out tonight. This is amazing, and I love doing this. And we get to do this.
We do. And you all bring questions, your comments, your energy, which is really fun, Fred. Thank you for supporting Michigan Public. I know it is near and dear to all of us, including Rebecca. So thank you for that. And write us with your questions.
Because at MichiganPublic.org.
We love getting the questions because it really does help us think about something we hadn't before. And Stephen, I will just give you a little teaser. I think an episode I really loved was somebody wrote to us about where do your dumbbells come from?
So that's what they're training Friday afternoons at 4:45, Sunday mornings at 9:35 on Michigan Public.
Thank you.